All right, thank you all for coming here for this announcement today. My twin brother Ali and I started Code.org as a hobby. It was a personal hobby to make a video to inspire students to learn computer science. 10 million views later, my hobby has become a life mission, and the organization of one has now become a team of dozens. And before we go into the details of what we're doing at Code.org, I wanted to start by showing you a short video. This is footage from the same interviews that led to the first Code.org video. Our first short film was basically intended for students as an inspiration. This is a video intended for influencers, whether among the media, among the press, world leaders, educators, even teachers.
Software and computers. It used to be that was just kind of a separate area of the world, but now software touches all these different things that you use.
I think if you look at everything, there's more phones and tablets and laptops and websites, and everybody's on social media, and it's just all these different things, and everything's just moving faster. So just being in a position to kind of understand that language that's going to be the future, I think it's a good thing to do.
It's absolutely crucial to know how to code and to understand how technology is built, even if you don't choose to, make a living or be a full-time software developer. Understanding how software works, which is something that affects everything around you, from your purchases to, how you eat and just how everything works nowadays, is really important to be able to know how it works so that you are not sort of a victim of other people's choices.
It's important for these kids right now, starting at 8 years old, to be a citizen on this planet. Hey, whatever country you're from, to read and write code.
If you wait until you're an adult, you probably will never do it.
I always felt like if I didn't learn how to program, it would be like not learning how to read. The future would just be closed to me.
When I think about what we're going to be teaching in schools 5, 10, 15 years from now, I definitely think that computer science, or at least basic programming, is going to be as important of a skill as being able to do basic reading and writing. And I think we're going to look back and wonder why it took us so long to get to that point.
Thank you. So our first video had an insane reception and basically put me headlong into a decision to basically commit my life to making really what Mark Zuckerberg said at the end true, and getting this something that we teach, like reading and writing and math. And the Code.org vision is that every school should teach computer science, and that every student should have a chance to study it, or at least get some basic exposure. And living in Silicon Valley, you don't need me to repeat the reams of data that shows about the million job gap or the opportunity to grow the economy. People in Silicon Valley understand the real reason we're doing this and that I'm doing this is because it's the right thing to do. We don't look at job data when we decide to teach our students that red blood cells carry oxygen, or that water is H2O, or how to solve the quadratic equation. And in the 21st century, surrounded by technology and computers, every child needs some basic awareness of what it takes to program a computer and create these technologies. So today we're announcing our first step on a long road to realizing that vision. We're announcing the Hour of Code. This is a massive worldwide campaign for Computer Science Education Week. So Computer Science Education Week is the second week of December to celebrate the birthday of Grace Hopper, a woman who's an early founder of computer science. And it's a congressionally recognized, internationally celebrated week that you've probably never heard of, and we're going to be dialing it up to 11 this year. So this year, what we're going to be doing for Computer Science Education Week is introducing 10 million students to 1 hour of code. And what that means is we're asking teachers worldwide to take 1 hour during that week, whether in English class, math class, science class, whatnot, to spend 1 hour to teach basically basic computer science to their students. And we're actually reaching beyond the classroom, not only to after school to reach students, but to employers or labor unions to reach adults as well. Now, people ask, well, what's an hour of code? we're partnering with numerous organizations to create online tutorials that anybody can do, and the goal of these tutorials are basically to give you an introduction, a taste, and to demystify this field, to remove the veil that separates regular people from the Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And speaking about Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, after receiving at least 1,000 personal emails asking me to make this happen, we're excited to say that Code.org is also going to produce our own 1-hour tutorial, which will be featuring video lectures from Bill Gates, from Mark Zuckerberg, and a diverse group of role models from all walks of life and multiple different industries. And our tutorial is going to teach you the basics of coding, but it'll also feel like a game. So instead of just taking a lesson, it'll be like playing a game that enables you to actually program a game. And we're also excited to say that we're going to feature artwork from Angry Birds and Plants vs. Zombies, two of literally the most popular games in the entire world, to basically expose students to this new field. So lectures from Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg to program Angry Birds and Plants vs. Zombies is going to be 10 million students' first introduction to learning how to code. So this shows you a screenshot of the tutorial we're building. It's going to work on any PC, any tablet, or any phone. But it's really important to basically allow this to be used by people who don't have computers. In many schools, there's not enough computers for the kids, so kids can do it on smartphones. And if they don't have smartphones, we're going to have unplugged tutorials, which basically means pen and paper exercises that students can do in a group to teach them how an algorithm works or how to give instructions to a computer without even using a computer. We're designing this to be used by every single classroom in the world. We're also announcing a number of prizes for participants because we want this to be something that teachers and educators worldwide can adopt, but especially in this country. So the first thing is for the first 100,000 educators to basically sign up to do an hour of code, we're going to give them 10 gigabytes of free storage thanks to Dropbox and their Dropbox accounts if they have them. And then we're encouraging schools to do an hour of code for every single student to basically pass kids through the computer lab to learn 1 hour of computer science. I'm personally donating a free class set of laptops to 50 schools, one lucky school in every state that basically agrees to do an hour of code for all of their students. And then lastly, 50 lucky classrooms are going to win video chats with Bill Gates, Jack Dorsey, Susan Wojcicki of Google, and Gabe Newell of Valve as a little intro to kick off their hour of code. Now, beyond this first hour, which is just an introduction, there's this question of what's the follow-on after an hour, and of course we're going to lead people to basically learn whether it's online or from teachers as a follow-on, and students who take on follow-on course online with us are going to have a chance to win other real-world gifts, including Skype credits or online gift cards to very popular online stores. So, also talking about the follow-on, really the hour is just an introduction. For the students, it's an introduction. For the teachers, it's an introduction and a chance to learn about something that they may want to go on to learn. And for us as well, it's an introduction on a 10-year journey to bring computer science to every school in the country. And also to basically announce how we're going to go about doing that, we want to announce a very unprecedented list of donors and partners and backers to our effort. And this has been an amazing thing for me. This is a group that basically we've collected literally just in the last 3 months. So from the tech industry and really from corporates, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and a whole bunch of other companies have come through as either major donors or major promotional partners. Literally the 4 largest software companies in the country are backing this collectively. From the educational world, the Association of Computing Machinery, the Boys and Girls Club, the College Board, Teach for America, and the National Associations of Science Teachers, Math Teachers, and Computer Science Teachers, and many other organizations are all supporting our organization and the Hour of Code promotion. And then lastly, I'm humbled to announce our individual founding donors who are basically very generous donors who are backing our effort and making this possible and putting us on our pathway to solve this problem for the country. It includes folks like Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, John Doerr, Reid Hoffman, Steve Case, Piero Mediar, and a whole bunch of names of basically many of the top leaders in the tech industry. What's amazing about this list is these are actually the highlights. So if you go to our website, you'll see a list that's almost 3 times as long of names of people who are basically supporting either Code.org as donors or the Hour of Code as promotional partners. And it's been amazing collecting this group. We've assembled this incredible support from the tech industry, And the reason actually is that this problem is bigger than tech. The opportunity for computer science isn't just for the tech industry. In fact, 2/3 of the jobs in software are outside of the tech industry. They're in banking and retail and government and entertainment. So this isn't a tech industry problem, it's an America problem, and really it's America's opportunity. At a time when our government is divided and can't do stuff, this is a chance and an opportunity to create millions of jobs and to boost our economy and to prepare our children for the 21st century. So I firmly believe that bringing computer science education to every student is the gift that the tech industry owes back to America. And recruiting their support has been a pleasure because it has been so natural and people have been so willing to make this happen. So to speak a few words on behalf of really the tech industry, I'd like to introduce the founder and chairman of LinkedIn and a personal friend and role model, Reid Hoffman.
Let's see. Both use the microphone and sidestep the podium a little bit. So I'll start by wishing you all happy Adventures in Navigation Day. Why I'm not calling it Columbus Day, two reasons. The first of which, if you haven't seen it, the simplest form will be go to the Oatmeal comic and see the comic on Columbus Day, and that will give you some detail. The second, and I think he refers to it as Bartholomew Day, the second I will come back to. So I'm aware that as I stand before you, that classically this looks like a Silicon Valley cause. It's a, how do we hire more engineers? How do we build out our industry? This is, really important. You're like, well, but there's a lot more problems in the world. And for what it's worth, there's nothing wrong with the classic Silicon Valley cause. That the fact that we are growing robust tech industries is a good thing for the world. But however, there's much, much more to this than that. And I think that there are 4 levels to think about how actually, in fact, teaching computer science, coding to everyone, to every kid, is actually beneficial. First, the individuals and their lives themselves. Second is the transformation of industries. The third is the US, and the fourth is the world. So let's start with the individuals. So you say, well, okay, you teach coding, they can get a software engineering job, it can make an economic transformation of life. This is the classic sort of Silicon Valley, drumbeat, which is important. But it does much more than that. For one, it actually teaches problem solving and critical thinking that's useful anywhere in terms of what you're doing in your life. It's an access to kind of crisp engineering problem solving that it's the easiest onboarding. Like, you can start with simple things like print hello world, right? As a way to start getting into this kind of problem solving that even, for example, 5-year-olds can learn. The second is that it's understanding the modern world around you, right? Software is transforming just about every industry. And if you think about how in the information age, self-driving cars, personalized medicine, all of these areas are transforming, these industries are transforming, and you begin to think of what does employment look like in any of these industries? What does problem solving look like in any of these industries? The fundamentals of being able to do reasoning the way that coding skills teach you is fundamental across all of these industries, and that's part of how it transforms an individual's life. It's not simply, oh look, we might get a software engineering job at a really great company, but it's almost every industry and it's almost any sorts of problem solving, which is how we go through life. The second is industry, and I've already sort of foreshadowed this comment in that it is not simply that we have a growing, robust set of software companies here in the Valley. We do, that's great. But in fact, all industries are somewhat being touched by the information revolution, by the data revolution. I already referred to self-driving cars. Part of what's happening in pharmaceuticals and drugs is being able to code our genetics in terms of transforming those into the bits in the digital world and then being able to study what the results are, personalized medicine, and on when it goes through. So industries, wherever you are, it's important for coding skills. The US, well, not only is the question of do we have vibrant industries and should we support those industries, but as we actually have vibrant industries in economics, which come from being adaptive, come from being able to, help participate on the leading edge of products and services, That then creates the economics that then feed back into all the other changes that we want to see. It feeds back into healthcare, it feeds back into education, and obviously we have education in a direct format as well. And so this is not something that's simply important to a set of software companies, but something that's important to the country overall. And then finally, the world. And part of this reason important to the world is not just like, well, okay, you take the US and you go to every country and you say, look, vibrant industries are good. Yes, that's of course true. But it's also, you begin to think about how technology, and in particular software, can transform other kinds of causes that we care about. And so, for example, you've got everything from how does it transform government? You've got, like, for example, what New York has been doing with the 311. You've got how does it transform poverty? You can see what Kiva.org is doing in terms of providing a marketplace. There's all of these places in which software can tackle serious, or help solve, not solely, but help solve serious problems in the world that are the ones that we all care about. So let's come back to the kind of hour of code. You know, why is hour of code important? It's important because every journey starts with a step. And the sooner that we get the problem-solving skills, the experience of what's going on with computer engineering into the minds of everyone, most especially the next generation, most especially our youth and our children, that helps them navigate the world in the right way. And so that's why I call this Happy Adventures in Navigation Day, right, for Columbus Day, because what we are trying to do with the Hour of Code is we are trying to help the next generation figure out how to navigate the new modern world, whether it's problem solving, understanding the technologies around them. That's what this is trying to do. And so with that, that was all I really planned on saying, so hopefully that was useful. And I will say, this is a great guy to do it.
Thank you. One great thing about Reed is that he took this Columbus Day date, which turned out to be an error on our parts, to make it sound like it was actually intentional in terms of the timing of this event. I'd like to ask Hydra Mendoza from the mayor's office to come talk about how the city of San Francisco is going to be supporting the Hour of Code campaign.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Hydra Mendoza, and I serve as Mayor Lee's Education and Family Services Advisor and also a member of the Board of Education, and a parent of 2 kids who are way more advanced in technology than I am. I'm actually really delighted to be here this afternoon because this is key and important. Mayor Lee sends his regards. He's actually on his way to China, and I know that he will personally experience what China is doing and what we are not. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for us to get on board and to talk about basics. Mayor Lee has initiated the Mayor's Education Leadership in middle schools, and through that program and partnering with Salesforce.com Foundation, we've been able to Wi-Fi all of our middle schools and to put devices into the hands of our students. And as part of that initiative, we're really talking about not all the apps and all of the programs that they're going to be able to have access to, but how do we actually get to those programs and to those apps? So computer science, which has been not in our schools for many, many years, is now something that we want to bring back, and we want to make sure that our kids all have access to. So we as a school district here in San Francisco have adopted the Common Core, and we're actually one of 8 school districts in the state of California that have already received a waiver, and we're going to be pushing the envelope even more in California. And so our commitment today, not only to code.org, but to our students, our 56,000 students in San Francisco Unified School District, is to ensure that they have this opportunity to participate in this Hour of Code and beyond. So we're committing to have our middle schoolers that are part of the Mayor's Leadership Initiative to be able to have access and support during the Hour of Code, and to ensure that all of our teachers who are already early adapters and are already committed to making sure that our students understand the value and importance of coding will be able to participate in this wonderful initiative. And we're also also committing to ensuring that all of our principals throughout San Francisco Unified have access and opportunity to the same that our middle school students will have access to. So on behalf of our 56,000 students and Mayor Lee, who certainly looks at San Francisco as the center of innovation, we're delighted to be part of this. We want to thank you, Hadi, for this amazing gift, because as simple and as important as it is, it really is a gift to remind us what the basics are and how we need to go back to them to ensure that we know where we're going and where we've come from. And so again, on behalf of Mayor Lee and San Francisco Unified School District, we are on board and we're really excited to be part of this. So thank you.
So we're going to have a panel to talk about a little bit about the issues in computer science education. And we're going to be joined by both Google and Microsoft, who are our first and our most important backers in this campaign. But to introduce our moderator, Ellen Lin, I met Ellen 3 years ago when the head of the CS department at UW spoke to me when I first got interested in this field, and he said, you have to meet her. She's basically the best computer science teacher in the state and very passionate about this field. And she was basically the first person I spoke to learn more about computer science education in the state of education. So thank you, Ellen. I'm not sure.
The panelists could come up, please. I'll introduce them one by one. And thank you so much, Hadi. I'm humbled to be here and very excited to be part of this initiative. So we're going to have a panel until about 3 o'clock, and what I'm going to do is briefly introduce each of the panelists. They represent a broad range of different perspectives on computer science education. So it's really excited to have all those voices. It's very exciting to have all of those voices represented here. I'm going to have a few questions that I have prepared, and then we'll leave a few minutes for you all to ask questions. So please be thinking about things that you would like to ask. So to my right, I have State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. So the superintendent was elected to a 4-year term in 2010, and as a chief of California's public school system and a leader of the California Department of Education, Superintendent Torlakson has applied his experience as a science teacher, a high school coach, and a state policymaker to fight for California students and improve the state's public education system. Thank you for joining us. To his right is Maggie Johnson, who is the Director of Education and University Relations at Google. So at Google, Maggie manages technical training and leadership development programs for engineers as well as operations staff, the information management and technical writing teams, and Google's educational outreach efforts. She also manages the university relations area, which means building strategic partnerships with faculty and labs globally. Prior to Google, Maggie was a faculty member and director of undergraduate studies in Stanford's computer science department. And of course, you've heard from Hadi Partovi, again, CEO of Code.org. To his right is Max Levchin, who is the president and CEO of HVF. And Max co-founded PayPal and was its CTO until it was acquired by eBay. More recently, he's been involved in an innovation lab called HVF, which explores and funds data-driven projects. And the HVF launched its first project called Affirm in early 2013, recently launched Glow, which some of you may have read about. And he's currently serving on the boards of several well-known companies such as Yelp and Yahoo. And finally, we have Brad Smith with us today, who is the General Counsel and the Executive Vice President for the Legal and Corporate Affairs Group at Microsoft. And so his group is responsible for all of the legal work and for government, industry, and community affairs activities, again, at Microsoft. So thank you all for being with us here today. As I said, it's a really great panel with a diversity of perspectives. So before we get started in earnest, I thought it would just be fun to ask you guys whether any of you had plans for the Hour of Code. Is anybody doing anything interesting? Either as a participant or maybe as a planner?
Well, I have an 11-year-old daughter, who I've already talked to her technology teacher, and she's going to be doing Hour of Code with her 6th grade. So that's one thing.
At Microsoft, we are going to prove that absolutely anybody on the planet can learn to code, because we're going to try to get each of our lawyers to spend an hour doing it.
I'm looking forward to going to classrooms and seeing students firsthand and putting my hands on.
I just hope to get some time to actually code.
Fantastic. So, as I said, we've got a lot of different perspectives represented here. So I wanted to hear a little bit about your organizations and your personal reasons for thinking that computer science should be a central part of a young person's education. And maybe we can start with Brad.
Well, I think that computer science is to the 21st century what physics was to the 20th. I mean, it is a fundamental field that is at the heart of so many advances in so many other fields, and certainly for so much technological innovation. And yet I think the great difference is that here in the 13th year of the century, we have such a long ways to go in order to make this field available to students across the country. As just one data point, there's over 42,000 high schools in the United States. And yet last year, the number of high schools that was certified to teach the AP course in computer science was only 2,555. Fewer students last year took the AP exam in computer science than took the AP exam in art history, for example. It was only about a 15th of the number who took the AP exam in calculus. So we have a long ways to go, and certainly one of the things that we've been doing at Microsoft, together with a lot of other people who are represented here or on the list, is just pursuing a variety of programs to try to fill this gap, both in the K-12 system and in the higher education system.
Other perspectives on why computing should be such a central focus of a young person's education?
Well, it's also vital for our economy, and as I talk to employers up and down the state, they need engineers in general, and they need computer science engineers in particular, so it's a huge focus. I represent over 10,000 schools, 6 million students, and not enough of that kind of education that Brad just spoke to is going on, and so I want to encourage it. I have an initiative through our education technology task force called, well, we want one-to-one computing capacity every hour of the day during the school day and off campus and on the weekends, but we're calling that initiative No Child Left Offline. So you have the magic of the actual learning, but then beyond that is this whole issue of computer science, learning to program, learning to code, learning how computers work and how they can transform the world. And so I believe that this is a mission that we need to enthusiastically endorse and change the direction so we have more high school and college graduates ready to go to work in our fields.
I think it's pretty fundamental to just generally broaden the acceptance and understanding of computer science, not only because it is the quintessential science for the 21st century, it is the physics of the next generation, but also to maintain economic competitiveness of the United States going forward. We are basically, even if we think that physics is just fine and we don't have to change it up to computer science, the rest of the world isn't. And I read somewhere in the one of the books of Neil Stephenson, if I remember correctly, in the 21st century, Americans are pretty much going to be only good at two things, writing code and delivering pizza. And I want our children to write code, because that probably will keep them more economically prepared for the competitive universe. Jokes aside, though, I think learning how to code, learning how vast majority of everything around them works, literally. That is to say that everything, Internet of Things, one and many other trends like it, having that knowledge will prepare children for the generations to come to participate in an interesting way in the economic development of the world. So that's probably the reason I'm most excited about it.
Well, I think, as Tom mentioned, there's a pipeline problem, a really serious one, where we have way more demand than we have supply, in terms of computer science and computing professionals. And even with the upturn that we've seen in the last couple of years in the number of majors coming out of our undergraduate programs, there's still, if you project forward 8 to 10 years, there's just not going to be enough. So what we really need to be thinking about, and Adi's got a great start here, is how to help both students, parents, teachers, administrators understand the potential for a career in this field, and also understand that it's not about sitting in an isolated cubicle 10 hours, not doing anything, but looking at that computer and not talking to anybody. It's just not like that at all. It is an inherently creative activity, and it's team-based. And this is something else that we really have to help our kids understand. It's just some perception issues as well as the career potential.
Now, Brad started out mentioning that we have a problem in terms of K-12 students having access to computing courses. A lot of schools just aren't teaching it. You saw from Hadi's slides as well that about 5% of students are taking computer science in U.S. schools. What do you think is the single biggest challenge that's keeping computer science courses from being more broadly offered currently? And Hadi, do you want to start us out with this?
Yeah.
I know you've been talking to a lot of schools.
Yeah, I can say pretty confidently that there's multiple challenges, and so this isn't an easy single thing that you solve problem. But the biggest challenge by far is the shortage of teachers, and the difficulty is you can't just solve that challenge in a vacuum because the local state policies in different states isn't really compatible with computer science education, and the states have trouble changing the policy because of the shortage of teachers, and it's hard to recruit teachers to the field because of the state policy, so there's a little bit of a chicken egg between those things. And then on top of that, there's a cultural stereotype that this is only for a unique sort of set of people. So, and we're trying to solve all three of those, basically, the availability of teachers, the state policy stuff, as well as the cultural perception. One other thing I wanted to mention, everybody here talked about how computer science is important. The one thing that's actually very sort of deeply ingrained in me is that this is actually fun. And for students, if you ask a student which is more fun, whether they're a girl or a boy, memorizing the capitals of all the cities in the world or building an app on a smartphone, 10 out of 10 students would say they'd rather build a cool little app. And so just making education fun for kids is actually a good reason for doing this.
And it's fun for teachers to be with kids that are enthused and excited. And I do agree with the need to go back, and our task force report says we need to go back to the schools of education and make sure we have a reorientation to this rich new way of learning itself and the 21st century skills that go along with the Common Core, but also open up the door for teachers to be certified and have certification in various areas where they can be certified in coding, they can be certified in analysis of data and using the data from computer programs to help instruct individual efforts in learning. So that's huge. One other thing is the equipment. And it's embarrassing that in California we're like 40th in the nation in the lack of internet connecting devices and bandwidth. We may only have about a half of what we need to actually full-on do the learning digitally through the internet, as well as do the assessment through the internet. So a number of issues, and I can bring them up later, of how we can together go to the state legislature. This year they did follow a request of mine for $1.25 billion to actually invest in the teacher training that we're talking about and in the computer connectivity. So whether it's bandwidth, towers, Wi-Fi antenna, the wiring, we need to get that capital dollars in there to match this creative teaching.
Not to add even more bad news to what you're, but the curriculum is also really tight in high school. So if you look at just trying to fit anything else in, that's why for years really the only way in for any kind of computer science education has been advanced placement. So that's another issue that I think needs to be dealt with both at the policy level and just in terms of finding ways to not only have computer science education, but ways of integrating into other areas as well.
Fantastic. Now, speaking about policy, Brad, I know that your group has been heavily involved in policy work. Could you tell us a little bit about how Microsoft has been working to influence computer science education policy?
Sure. I think there's a couple of dimensions that both highlight some of the problems and also some of the solutions. First is the point that Hadi made. State policy plays a tremendous role. Right now in 38 states still, Even if you're lucky enough to go to a high school where you can take the AP course in computer science, it will not count towards either your math or your science distribution requirements to graduate from high school. And that's just a real deterrent. It goes as well to the point that Maggie made it. It's a lot harder for a principal or a superintendent to get enthused about adding a computer science course to the curriculum when that won't count towards what the students need to study in order to meet the state's graduation requirements. So at the state level, we need to move as quickly as we can to make computer science count and make it count in all 50 states. I do think this is the kind of problem that just calling attention takes a big step towards solving it, because when people step back and think about it, they do tend to get it, and there's a lot of opportunity for progress. At the federal level, our sense is the federal government can do a lot more to help. In a sense, I'd say we've been here before as a country. In the late 1950s, there was this broad recognition after the launch of Sputnik that the country needed to invest in math and science education. Federal law was passed. That's really what led to the first federal programs at both the higher ed and K-12 level to train teachers in new fields. And that time it was really math and science and Russian, of all things. But what we've proposed and what found its way happily into the comprehensive immigration bill passed by the Senate is a provision that would raise the fees on visas, because I think we all recognize that in the short run, the only way to fill the jobs is to hire more people from outside the United States, but use some of these visa fees and green card fees to create a national STEM education fund, and to provide this money to the states specifically for initiatives such as teacher training. The problem is multifaceted, but that's probably the single most expensive part of the problem to solve. And that's the kind of thing that, together with philanthropy and Code.org, can help us grow to scale in teacher training.
One thing I wanted to say on the policy side is Code.org has a sister organization called Computing in the Core to basically impact the policy at the state level and the federal level. Microsoft has been a tremendous help in terms of the state-by-state effort to do this, but the numerous other tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, have all basically lent a hand or are going to be lending a hand in doing this. And some amazing inroads we've made. In this incredibly divided Congress, we managed to get the House to vote unanimously to make an amendment to the ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act for computer science. And at the state-by-state level, just in the last few months, we've had 3 different states change policy on this recognizing computer science towards graduation credits. So it's somewhat unheard of to have this U.S. House vote unanimously on anything, and it's almost more unheard of to have 3 different states in a span of 4 months change policy on an issue in such a quick period. And our goal is to basically get us from where Brad said we are to have, instead of 14, 15 states, having 24 states by the end of next year recognize computer science as part of the math and science pathways.
Supporting that, I'd also like to add that on another federal policy level, we need to all work together, the same kind of coalition you put together for Code.org, on E-rate. It's a source of funding that was established by the federal government to help low-income students and their families connect to the internet, and to also get the connection out into rural areas of this country. And so I'm leading an effort of other school chiefs, all parties, rural, urban, to change the E-rate level, and we need to work with the FCC. I went back recently and met with a couple of commissioners, and Senator John Rockefeller from West Virginia is heading up an effort to increase the amount of money, which is now only $2.5 billion a year, to double that, and to how to make it easier for schools to apply to get those funds. So more of our kids and our teachers will have access to the internet.
And one reason to increase access to computer science education, which we haven't heard as much about, is just to increase the diversity in the field. We certainly have low diversity, and that is in terms of gender diversity, of ethnic diversity, of socioeconomic diversity, of in terms of rural-urban divide. So all of those things are another reason to get computer science in more schools. Now, Maggie, I know that Google has been specifically working hard to increase representation in computer science. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those initiatives?
Sure. Let me start by just talking about why it's so important to have diversity in the workforce and technology. If we're going to build systems that are designed and implemented by a particular demographic, there will be a inherent but unintentional bias in those systems. So if we want to create systems that are really accessible to everyone, then they must be developed and implemented by a diverse group. So it's a really important aspect of what we're doing and what we're building to have that diversity in our workforce. Now at Google, we do quite a bit to support this. We have our Rise Award program, which is every year we go out and identify small organizations that are working in this area. There's so much work going on in this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to find the ones doing really impactful things, and then we fund them. We're also strong supporters of NC WIT and the Anita Borg Institute, which are two of the most important organizations with the women in technology issue. We have intern programs, and we have the Computer Science Summer Institute. All of these programs bring a large number of diverse, both women and underrepresented minority students to a Google campus every summer. And they either work on industry-level projects, or they go through some computer science educational activities that are complementary to their undergraduate programs. So those are some highlights.
By the way, the diversity issue is the key reason we came up with the Hour of Code campaign, because all the data shows that the stereotypical computer programmer is basically a young white male. And the whole idea behind the Hour of Code is to get 10 million people, young or old, of all races, all demographic backgrounds, and especially boy and girl, to engage at least in 1 hour of this. And once we have that happen, suddenly we'll be in a world where it's not just a minority of people or just the young white male boys who've learned computer programming, that everybody's at least tried it, and then people can decide who wants to go on and learn it.
And Maggie, you kind of mentioned there's not a lot of great curriculum yet, but there's a lot of efforts that are certainly underway, and a lot of really promising practices and tools that are out there. So to any of you, if a parent or a teacher comes to you and says, my student is interested, they've done the Hour of Code, what's next? What might you tell them? And Hadi, maybe you want to start with that, and we'll hear other ideas as well.
Yeah, so we're going to have a whole bunch of sort of curated online tutorials for people if they want to go beyond 1 hour to learn, depending on what level you're at, whether it's elementary level or high school or post high school or whatnot. But the real challenge is actually bringing computer science to schools near them. Code.org already has basically the best database of all the local places you can learn, whether it's public schools, private schools, workshops, summer camps, to lead people to learn in a physical location near them. But our long-term effort beyond the Hour of Code is going to be bringing computer science school by school to every school in the country.
Anyone else have things that they like to tell parents or teachers, something concrete? Here's a place to start. Max, did you want to suggest something?
Sure. I think just sort of my personal experience, this is slightly apropos, although I'm not entirely sure how. So I grew up in the country that launched the Sputnik. And it's interesting, quite some time ago, but my first exposure to code and programming was actually in a sort of a neighborhood workshop. This is in the early 80s, so this is a while ago, and I never really spent a lot of time thinking about it, but it's remarkable that a relatively backwards, or a very backwards country like Soviet Union had plenitude of these local places that kids could gather and learn how to code. And there were basically industry people at the time, sort of crunchy old software developers from the defense program, basically, that were volunteering their time teaching kids how to write code. And I think today in the US, I'm not entirely sure, given our relatively sad computer science education state of affairs, we can do much better. So today I would tell a parent, hey, you know what? Find someone who writes code for a living that is volunteering their time at a local workshop, and that's a great place to get going. But ultimately, the thing that sort of put me on path to becoming a computer scientist was an amazing teacher. When I was in last year of my Soviet high school, I was extraordinarily lucky to have a computer science teacher that understood that computer science and coding and everything that you could learn isn't just important for the sort of economic prosperity or from a science perspective. He ultimately thought of it as an art form, as a form of self-expression and fun, and that just fundamentally changed my view of this is math, but a little bit more. It's math with typing became this is the way to be interesting. This is the way to. It stopped. It never was really for me a nerdy thing to do. It was something that I felt I could differentiate myself from my peers and on. So ultimately, that's why changing that perception is probably one of the more important reasons why Code.org is so cool and so important.
And we are on a frontier, a very exciting time in transforming education in California using the new Common Core, the critical thinking skills, the problem-solving skills, and also the local control funding formula that puts more money into low-income students and into the education of English learners. There's an accountability plan that every single school district in the state is going to have to produce by June 30th next year. And why not so the parent can be an advocate, why not have that be integrated into the new plans for how we advance education in California? We have programs like MESA, Math, Engineering, Science Achievement. Has been around for 40 years. It doesn't do a lot in computer science, but it could do more. But it does reach out to disadvantaged students. You have Girls Who Code. So how to connect that parent and that student to a robotics club and approach a science teacher who is open to learning how to be that computer science teacher and code on robots, code on prosthetic arm contests they have. There's ways you can get some hands-on activities while we build the bigger infrastructure that each of the panelists has spoken to.
Fantastic. So we can hear there's a lot of hopeful developments happening from a lot of different angles. I'd love to take a few questions from you, if anybody had anything they would like to ask our panelists. Yes, please.
So I want to talk about what you said about being sort of a Silicon Valley employment kind of thing. Is that, he was saying that it possibly that, a lot of people will look at this as a Silicon Valley cause. We need more engineers to shut down whatever jackals we're working on right now. So how do you answer that? The idea that it's sort of selfish, or that it's not, that it's good for the whole country, or is it just good for Silicon Valley? There are some perceptions of that.
I don't think
So
it's
the
good for, sorry.
Uh-oh, we have an answer.
Sorry,
The question is, Reed kind of mentioned that we could look at this as a purely Silicon Valley cause, and so the question is, well, what would the answer be to that? How can we look at this as a national issue or even a global issue? And sounds like Max is going to take a first stab.
I think that until and unless manufacturing comes back to the US, we are going to be fundamentally exporting intellectual property. In the world scene, our trade will be exporting stuff that comes out of the brain. And these days, the most sellable version of that is code or programming systems. So it's hardly a Silicon Valley issue. It just happens to be the case that Silicon Valley is the most concentrated place where software is produced, but hopefully it'll be produced in more places. And we need more people that know how to do it. It's a little bit like we need more engineers in the 50s to make sure that we're competitive.
It'd be like going to a university and saying, gee, you all must be promoting reading because everybody at the university knows how. I mean, the reality is that, no, actually, I actually don't think it is, for the following reason. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. It doesn't matter what part of the economy you're in. Computers are ubiquitous. And of course, a computer that doesn't run software is just an expensive paperweight. It doesn't matter if you're going to maintain automobiles. All of these fields are being touched by computers, and all of these companies and industries need advances in computer science in order to move forward. And Silicon Valley may be the part of the country that coined the phrase Silicon Valley, but look across the country. Go down to Los Angeles, they talk about Silicon Beach. Go to Utah, they talk about the Silicon Slopes. Go to Des Moines, they're talking about the Silicon Prairie. Go to New York, they're talking about Silicon Alley. Go to London, they're talking about the Silicon Roundabout.
People aren't very creative.
It could be because people are not very creative, but what it really reflects is that there all of their industries and all of their economies are increasingly based on silicon, computers. And hence, this really has become something that has become some part of the fabric of the economy, not just nationally, but increasingly on a global basis as well.
Yeah, there's, in this country, 2/3 of the software jobs are outside of tech companies. And every single state and every single congressional district has more jobs for software engineers than there are students studying this field. So that is basically, it's a national problem.
I've been in Washington in those meetings with the congressmen are like, hey, what does this help? You know what I mean? They have that perception and there's a bit of a hostility that exists even on every issue around.
Yeah, although I would say it's a good point, but I think that's breaking down. And if you want to look at one place where it's breaking down, look at how the people in politics run their campaigns. I mean, look at the degree to which campaigns are now basically data and computing intensive activities. It's just one more example of the ubiquity of what we're talking about here.
Either way, Code.org's goal isn't to create enough computer programmers to fill these jobs. Our vision is about every student, and every student doesn't need to become a computer programmer for a living. And the reason we're doing this is every politician in 2040 should have enough of a background to know about the technology that they're going to be regulating. You know, every single doctor in 2040 should have some background in this stuff, because the actual things that are going to be put in your body are going to include computing devices and so on for, controlling your medicine. So this isn't a field that's just going to be limited to the people creating the software. It's just something that I firmly believe every student is going to need to learn.
It's already happening. If you look at universities and the number of majors right now that require introductory computer science, just to, for students to get that major and to be successful in those fields. I mean, things like economics, like areas of business, medicine, biology, these are all areas where, and it's not just computing or learning how to use a computer, it's algorithmic design and thinking. So this is already happening quite a bit.
Thank you. I'd like to take another question from you.
Or comment.
So I have a quick one in closing. So what can we expect in the next 5 years or so? What's kind of the outcome of all this? What would we like to see? Maybe is really what I'm asking.
Well, I actually thought Adi put it extremely well. We should want to create a future where every student in this country has the opportunity to learn computer science before he or she graduates from high school. It doesn't mean that every American student necessarily should, but everybody ought to have the chance if that's what they want. And we should build on that by creating the capacity in our university systems across the country to graduate the students who will have the skills to fill the jobs that the economy is creating. Right now, we're falling farther behind each year rather than catching up. And 5 years from now, we'll have a couple of really easy metrics to look at. How many high schools offer this? How many college degrees are we producing? How does that compare to the number of jobs that are being created? Hopefully, we'll be making real progress.
And this, I think, should be part of a larger renaissance, a larger push for STEM education in general and engineers across different fields. And students will switch career pathways as they learn more and get excited. The legislature, in recognition of this emphasis on career technology education, has put out $250 million that my department will be dispersing in grants over the next 3 years. And I want to make sure that among those careers is computer science. And we have career pathways that move from middle and high school education right up into community college and into our universities. And I want to say I heartily endorse Hadi, your vision here and the Hour of Code, and want to see, and I'll be asking all 1,100 districts in California to join in the campaign, because I want to see every student, millions of students, have the chance to have this opportunity to learn coding and programming.
I want to point out that the superintendent and I talked about what he just said literally 10 minutes before this event started. He said, what is it that we could do? And I said, well, you could announce that you're going to ask every principal in California to do this. And he said, done. So I was about to ask you whether you're going to actually talk about it, so I'm glad you remembered. Well, to close this event, I wanted to ask two things. First of all, this is really important for our country. No matter what you do, help us spread the word about the Hour of Code. If you're a parent, ask your student's teacher or your principal to offer an Hour of Code in their schools. everybody here should also get a code.org hat as you walk out, and I want you to actually wear those, not to promote code.org, but to promote computer science. And especially those of you here who are women, consider wearing the hat, or go to our website. We have these t-shirts that say "Code Like a Girl" that are fantastic. Part of code.org's goal is to get people to think that this isn't just for a minority of Americans. So wear the hats or t-shirts proudly, because it takes basically the leaders of our industry to help set a trend for the rest of the country. Thank you so much.